Welcome back to the Mintcast. My name is Alan McLeod, and I'm senior staff writer and podcast producer here at Mint Press News. This show is made possible by supporters like you. We face widespread shadow banning and censorship across many platforms because of our independent anti-war journalism, and so we need support from people like you. We just started our annual funding drive, and it would mean the world to us if you could help us financially. Remember, we can only do it with you. We cannot do it without you. So there should be a link to the Indiegogo annual funder drive down below if you're watching on YouTube, or in the description if you're listening on audio. All right, today we've had a much requested guest joining us. If you haven't heard of him, you've either been living under a rock or you're under 30 and don't use TikTok. It is TikTok star James Rehwald. James makes extraordinarily funny, clever, and educational videos from a radical anti-imperialist perspective, and his shorts have been seen by probably tens of millions of people by now, including you, if you keep watching. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate the generous introduction.
Well, the pleasure's all mine here. Can I just start off by asking you to introduce yourself to the audience and ask how you got into this world? What's your story?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thanks for having me on. Let's see where to start. I guess I downloaded TikTok pretty much at the very beginning of when the pandemic really hit the US. So March 2020. And to rewind back further, I was pretty much a hater. Like I got the TikTok ads all the time, like YouTube, pre-roll ads and Facebook ads and whatnot. I thought it was kind of cringe. And I was just like, I don't know if this is for me. And then I just saw people doing like comedy skits that was kind of reminiscent of like the Vine and early YouTube days. So I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know people like post comedy skits like this. So I, downloaded it when I was, we were all in lockdown. Originally just using it as a consumer and just finding a lot of really entertaining content. I've been on, all the different social media platforms pretty much. So there was something that piqued my interest for sure with TikTok. I think, just the data scientists working behind the algorithm found something unique, and I thought it was really interesting. And my feed, after adjusting with some time, found some fun content. And I thought like, okay, I'll just start posting my own stuff just to like make my friends laugh. I think my like third or fourth video like went viral. And I just started to kind of build on that. And I think, with everything that's happened in 2020 and beyond, I think my political development was reflected in that of my content. So, originally I just had kind of silly, more apolitical videos and just sort of just, I don't know, random bits. And it kind of developed into more of like a poignant, like analysis of just what's wrong with the US, and, started to take on more of like an anti-imperialist character. And that's kind of just been my goal, just really develop my own political education and also improve my production. But I guess to like bring it back to just my own sort of journey politically. I grew up in like a pretty conservative background. Like both my parents are, Republicans, but like in different ways. So I grew up in the trenches, so to speak. I have had early exposure to all the, the Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh. I'd hear all that stuff. I wasn't sipping the Kool-Aid, so to speak. I think I was just kind of, a kid and didn't really care too much about that stuff. But probably, internalized it on some level, just like, at least at the very minimum, thinking like, oh, the US is the good guys and, they're fighting the bad guys, and just very like simplistic surface level type of stuff. So, I grew up around that. And I think as I got older, especially going to college, started to, care more. I probably identified more as like a liberal back then. And then, I don't know, progressive. And I think really my first exposure to like left-wing, anti-imperialist politics was through like the sort of like human rights organizations that sort of collaborated or hosted workshops with our like Filipino American Student Association in my college. And I think, basically I helped start the club there, and it was a lot more like cultural and, just trying to get people in through the door. But eventually I started like meeting these other folks that were, it was like the first time I really hear rhetoric that was like, US troops like get the fuck out of the Philippines. I was like, whoa, I just never had exposure like that. And I don't think it really maybe like, I don't know, maybe it was like the language is harsh, even though it was true. So I think that kind of like pushed me away at first. But then I think eventually I started listening in more deeply, and especially with the 2016 election with Donald Trump, I think was like a huge wake up call. Like, okay, like half the country is okay with this type of vitriol, and then sort of learning that eventually like, oh, okay, Democrats do a lot of the same stuff that people are mad at Republicans for, and start to go down that sort of rabbit hole and learn that they're really just like the political wings for the capitalist class. And and then with the time, of course, like 2020 and the BLM movement, just the severe police repression, the mishandling of the pandemic, the inequalities that came with that globally, it just all became very, very apparent that like I've been lied to my whole life. So a lot of unlearning had to be done. And I like the challenge of just trying to learn more and more about all this stuff, all the history and theory. So that's kind of where I'm at now. And it's been fun trying to find ways to sort of use all the political satire that I was really fond of, growing up. I think like the Colbert Report was like really funny to me when I was, watching it when I was much younger. Just seeing like someone do like a satirical mock of like, the right wing pundits that, I grew up around. It was just like really funny and genius to me. And then of course, it's sad when you see a lot of these guys, they don't really sort of point the target at Democrats. Like, there's no criticism from the left, except for like the very like, obvious ones that are like barely even liberal, if you can call them that. So, just trying to like basically make the type of comedy I wish I could see on TV, or streaming or whatever. And I think TikTok's really rich in that. And it's kind of nice seeing, all these like sort of small creators make amazing comedy. And I'm just trying to fill in that gap with some more like, a political leaning that's anti-imperialist.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely do that. And so I really want people who maybe haven't seen you or really don't realize that they have seen you to get a flavor of your work. So I'm going to play a quick clip now. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll talk about it later. If you're just listening to the audio only, it's called CIA is Funding the World's Terror Groups. All right. So as I said, if you're listening to the audio only, we just watched a video called The CIA is Funding the World's Terror Groups. James, one of your most frequent targets of your ire is the CIA. What's wrong with them? Aren't they all just intersectional Latinas with imposter syndrome? Aren't they all on our side? What's your beef with them?
Yes, no, I love the new CIA ads. They really lean into the identity politics. It feels like satire is dead when I watch their videos. Like, you too can join the imperialist project, toppling governments. But no, yeah, the CIA, it's they're basically gangsters for American capitalism. And they've existed that way since 1947. The U.S. has operated in the same way the CIA has, before the CIA existed as well. But it's some of the stuff you read about them. It's just like it looks like it's out of a science fiction novel, but it's all very real. So there's a lot of material for some great videos there. And that video I just did, I mean, that one was fun because I feel like I had to like cut down stuff because there was like stuff I wanted to add but didn't really fit to like the cutting of the music, and I had so much time in that song. Like for example, like the golden triangle, as well as the golden crescent. So the being complicit in drug trafficking from Afghanistan, as well as Laos, and really just more of a byproduct of the U.S. wanting to engage in anti-communist efforts abroad, and if that means funding these mercenaries or paramilitaries with opium production or cocaine or whatever, they can look past it. And we saw that in the case with the Vietnam War. We saw that with the war in Afghanistan. I mean, so much that they even have their own Wikipedia article on drug trafficking allegations with the CIA. So yeah, real dirty history.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think of it like that, but yeah, you packed in so much into that video. I think you were referencing Gary Webb, the San Jose Mercury reporter who broke the story that the CIA was involved in the crack epidemic in the 1980s, whereby the US either allowed this to happen or was actively participating in flooding, particularly black neighborhoods with crack cocaine in the 1980s. And they were doing that to basically fund right-wing death squads all over Central America who were tearing up the place, carrying out massacres, and trying to overthrow leftist governments. And so it is really extraordinary to see this organization trying to present themselves as like the friends of progressive movements and using this kind of language. In fact, I think it was partially down to me that those sorts of woke CIA ads really went viral. I was on the CIA website a couple of years ago, and I was trying to click on a video, and it wasn't really playing very well there. And then I pressed it, and it took me to YouTube, and it took me to an unlisted playlist of like all of these ads. And I was like, oh, hey, it's this woke CIA ad again. But there was actually a list of 12 of them there. And I was like, holy shit, they've made so many of these. It's unbelievable. And I made this master cut and stuck it out on Twitter. And I couldn't believe the amount of energy and uptake it got. I made it to be like, hey, isn't it absolutely ridiculous that this organization that goes around overthrowing governments, dealing drugs, killing foreign leaders is now pretending to be like the sort of liberal progressive institution that will help these people. But I actually got retweeted by people like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump Jr., who really signal boosted the entire thing. And their whole take on this woke CIA thing is, we told you the CIA are a bunch of radical leftist Marxists who are trying to overthrow America and install the gay agenda. That was basically their take on it. And it's just extraordinary to see how people can have like these completely differing views of this institution.
Yeah, no, it's God, that's why it's like really hard because you got to be like nuanced and you don't want to like add to the noise because like if you're in left wing spaces, like I'm sure you see the memes like people talk about corporations changing their profile logo to something to celebrate pride, and these leftists understand like they don't actually care. It's just recognizing like a market for profit. Whereas like the right wingers are just like on their like anti-woke hysteria and just like this weird proto-fascist type of like they're trying to make everybody gay. It's like, no, they just like want you to buy their stuff. It's not that crazy. And it's funny because you see it to new heights now. It's like with the CIA like pride posts. I mean, like the FBI making posts celebrating MLK is like wild. And then like Lockheed Martin, they had like I don't know if you saw that they had a pride float at DC, which was just so sad. It's like, guys, why? And then like I think like Miami celebrated Black History Month with like a police cruiser that like had like Black History Month written on the side. And I was just like, oh God. So yeah, just some liberal dystopia stuff. But yeah, it does suck because like I hope people can like look at this stuff for the facade of that it is. It's just the same way that like in the 70s and 80s when Black people started getting featured more in advertisements. If we had the same sort of like current of political atmosphere today, people would be like, oh, it's woke, they're trying to make like spread like Black people. Everyone's like, no, they're just like recognizing buying power in this market, and like racist people are starting to be like, oh, we can sell to these guys. They don't actually like care about representation or equality or anything. So yeah, it sucks because I love to make jokes about like just this sort of liberal shenanigans. But then, like you said, you look at people like Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson or whoever, and they are ready just to go on some homophobic, transphobic rant. So yeah, you gotta be careful on how to. And I guess that's kind of why I love about these making these videos, because you get to sort of hopefully provide a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I guess as a radical, you got to be careful when you attack Democrats too much in case you start bringing in Republicans and you're like, I don't remember asking you a damn thing, MFer. I'm not on your side, you know. I don't like them either. And yeah,
Exactly.
it's like when all these groups, like as you said, Lockheed Martin or the CIA, put out all of this completely insincere stuff about supporting gay rights. There's kind of like a fringe of people who are like, oh, this just proves this is all just, one big agenda or whatever. And yeah, I think you got to be careful to sort of separate the message and the messenger, I guess. That's what I'd say. I mean, because I basically endorse all those things. And by those things, I don't mean like overthrowing foreign governments or anything. I mean like, equal rights for women and, LGBT minorities.
Right.
So yeah, you got to be careful in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I always feel this pressure when I'm making fun of like liberals or Democrats in my videos that I gotta like in the same sentence make fun of Republicans just to like let them know like this you're part of this problem. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. We always say at Mint Press that, I guess whether it's Team Blue or Team Red who's in charge, a lot of the time the policies don't actually change because both of these parties are bought and paid for by the same giant corporations and same individuals and institutions which fund the permanent war economy, both parties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the media too. And we know who they are. It's Wall Street, it's big tech, it's the oil industry, it's big manufacturing, etc. It's basically the people with all the power and money in society. And I often wonder if we might actually be better off if we had a system where politicians would have to wear their political sponsors on their shirts and their sleeves like NASCAR drivers do. Maybe
yes,
maybe we'd be in a better position. I don't know.
yeah. I want more transparency into the which imperialist lapdog I get to vote in.
All right. Your next video that I wanted to show everyone is one that's close to my heart because it's specifically about media, which is kind of my wheelhouse. Let's take a look at this. It's called The US Propaganda Machine Explained. All right. So in that video, I'm just really impressed with the insane amount of work and research that's gone into those clips that just last a few seconds, basically. You've pretty much summed up my PhD thesis in less than a minute. What I really love about it is how you illustrate to what extent advertisers really call the shots in corporate media. Do you want to elaborate in words what you're trying to get across in this clip?
Yeah, yeah. I guess like the big, I mean, I definitely pulled from different areas that inspired me, including your writing, for this video. But I know one big one that I remember seeing when I was young was, there was like a SNL skit, like in like the late '90s, I think it was called like Mediaopoly. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you haven't, check it out. I think Adam McKay might have been involved in it, but I'm surprised it even aired because it took like a direct shot at like General Electric and NBC. And it kind of explained that whole sort of media landscape and the sort of ecosystem of, these are big corporations that have their own interests, as well as advertisers that they, need to make sure they're making a media reporting environment that's conducive to their profits. And I think that video was like a big, like, revelation for me. I was like, oh shit, like, yeah, I can see why this is not a good way to have an independent press, and earnest journalism. And I think also like just I haven't read it, but like I've seen like videos of like Michael Parenti talking about this topic. He had that book, what's it called? Inventing Reality. And then like Noam Chomsky's like Manufacturing Consents, like probably the more like original one that I think a lot of people are familiar with. So just kind of reading about those books and hearing them speak at like different events and whatnot, like just on like YouTube videos, sort of explaining some real world examples, like, at least in like the 80s, 90s, like the way the automotive industry had a big impact and like what kind of stories could be told and what stories wouldn't be told. So yeah, I mean, these corporations, whether it's Warner Brothers Discovery, who on CNN, or the Fox, or any of these guys, the big handful of them, since there used to be like 50 companies back in like the 70s that comprised like the majority of popular media. Now it's just like 5. I mean, their whole revenue model is built on ad revenue. They have to maintain relationships as broadcasters with all these different advertisers, and the ones that are able to spend the most are going to be the biggest companies. And you have everybody from fossil fuels to insurance companies to pharmaceutical companies to, you know, automotive, everything, meat packing plants, you know, Kellogg's, you know, whatever. So it's like literally just like the largest corporations keep these news channels afloat, and they don't want to, you know, they got to play a delicate balance of, you know, they want to ruffle their feathers. And, you know, I think in this video, I wanted to help explain that and, you know, just demonstrate that they do feel the pinch and the pressure to make sure they don't touch stories that are too hot. And even if they are able to talk about them, they got to use certain language and sort of be very exonerative with, you know, state authorities or corporate interests. And I kind of wanted to, so like taking that Mediopoly video, it was, you know, a little outdated, you know, from the 90s. So I wanted to update it and just have all that stuff they talked about with, you know, the sort of, I guess there's like three things I really wanted to address in the video. Like one, just the fact that like, you know, you hear all these people like, oh, there's like a state-run media like here in this X country, they're undemocratic, whatever. I want to prove like, yes, the US does the exact same thing, and not only within its borders, but all around the world. So I want to show that there's like US funded broadcasters and NGOs and, you know, the sort of touch like the nonprofit industrial complex, and just kind of briefly just pepper in like, no, the US does this everywhere. And then secondly, you know, corporate interests interfering with being able to have earnest journalism that's, you know, in the interests of the working class. And then thirdly, social media companies. So I want to kind of dive into these social media companies, showing how they've been used to, you know, influence public opinion, you know, against their own interests, as well as like just how, like, as you reported, that there's people within the intelligence community and national security that are getting hired into these companies in key positions. They're really pretty much following the same playbook that these news companies have done for years, where they bring in these experts and analysts from the national security state and intelligence, military officials. And now they're just doing the same thing again with social media companies. And it's just hilarious to me that these people start, you know, and if there's criticisms to make about TikTok, but it's just hilarious that these people start talking about TikTok and criticizing it without, you know, even batting an eye when it comes to their own media or their you know, social media companies and news corporations based in the U.S. So, you know, I wanted to address those three things and make it fun with music. As you can probably tell, my videos are very musically driven. So I like to do that. It makes it a little bit more engaging and hopefully easier to digest.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly much more easy to digest than like books and stuff that I've tried to write about it. But yeah, I guess like in the 1970s, it came out that the CIA had managed to insert hundreds of its operatives into newsrooms across the country, or they had a deal with like certain reporters, and that even goes on to this day. People like Ken Delanian was outed when he was at the LA Times for sending his stories to the CIA before they published them so they could edit them. And instead of getting fired and kicked out of journalism, he now got promoted, as now on television as a reporter. But I think nowadays that when you think about how the media works, it's no longer newsrooms that really call the shots. It's actually the people who are tweaking the algorithms over in Oakland or San Francisco or wherever their headquarters are, that are really kind of deciding what people see and what people don't see across the entire world for billions of people. It's that incredible choke point in our media that people don't even talk about. Talking about like algorithms and Silicon Valley, you're certainly not averse to the classic leftist tactic, which is the old wall of text stuck in there. I wonder if people stopping and going back and reading carefully the sources and all the stuff in your video actually helps you algorithmically. What do you think? Do you have any indication as to how many people will really follow up on all the information you provide? You're clearly trying to be educational and informing as well as entertaining.
Yeah, it's it's always a struggle, like trying to like hit that balance of like, do I provide more like extra information at the risk of making the video less like concise and easy to watch and more of a drain and a time suck, versus like trying not to sacrifice like thoroughness for like brevity's sake. So I try to balance that. My most recent video, I think I definitely leaned more into the wall of text, and it was like, I don't even know if this is ironic or I was like, whatever, because originally I was just gonna like, I was like, you know what, I'm just not gonna put any of this. They can just Google these things, and then I was like, you know what, I'll put it in here, and then they could pause if they want, or they could just watch it one full run through, and they come back if they want. So it's interesting trying to figure out like for example the CIA video, very like just straight up labels, just like keep it simple. And I like those. I like doing those kind of videos too. But of course, you start to leave it up to the user to try and find the right info, with digging through all the bourgeois sort of institutional sourced stuff. Can be a little bit of a challenge. So trying to offer a bit more direction in these cases can go a long way. But yeah, it's nice to put those details out there. I've been curious too, like how many people have really followed up on those sources, and a lot of the times, like I'm just trying to like spark interest. Like I obviously don't see my videos as any substitute for digging deeper and actually doing the research and reading and watching good documentaries or whatever it might be. So hopefully I'm able to spark interest, and I like the idea of providing some hard facts and like just some numbers that kind of pique people's interest. Like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, I should look that up. I didn't learn about that in school or see that in the news. I've even tried going on like Google Trends and seeing if there's like a peak. Like when my I don't know, I think when the CIA video like took off, I was like, oh, let's see if I tip the scale on a national level. And I think I've seen like little bumps like on Google Trends, and I have like a marketing background, so this stuff's like interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, it's cool hearing, especially just through the comments. People are nice and like, oh, I didn't know that. Like that's fucked up. So yeah, I would hope so. I would hope people do a little more digging and hopefully are a bit more inspired to learn why the world is the way it is.
Yeah, I guess we're all kind of slaves to the algorithm nowadays. One thing I have noticed that's a good thing about the algorithm is that YouTube comments are suddenly much more positive and friendly and a nicer place than they used to be. Before, like if you go back like 5 or 10 years, it was just like racist stuff about, the New World Order and the lizard people or something like coming to get you, or just people hysterically attacking you, claiming that you were either working for Mossad or Iran or something, or some weird stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I think we all have to think about algorithms a lot, and I suspect you do as well. I mean, was that a choice? For instance, I noticed you use a lot of like Nerf guns and stuff in your videos to stimulate violence, or like ketchup for blood or something. Is that what you're going for there? You have to like be absolutely clear that you don't want to trip up the algorithm.
It's yeah, it almost became that way later because like I just had them and I was like, because my partner's brother had like Nerf guns, and I was like, oh, okay, they're just sitting around. It's the beginning of the pandemic, so I started using them in the videos. And then later I was like, maybe I should just use like a real gun. I was like, wait, I don't think the algorithm's gonna like that. So it's kind of doubled for that reason. And I guess to go back to the earlier question in regards to the algorithm, yeah, I mean it's interesting trying to figure out what works. I mean, it's so nebulous, right? Like whether it's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. um it's just like there's no definite science. I mean, I've gathered like, for the most part, a lot of it just comes down to like the percentage of video watch, like people who just watch the whole video, like that's great. People who skip it in the first like 2 seconds, like obviously that's not good. So I try to make videos that like hopefully speak to the algorithm while also speaking to the intended audience. And it can be hard because sometimes you're going for the algorithm, but then it's like it doesn't, maybe you don't have the audience in mind, or vice versa. Um, so yeah, I mean it's definitely tricky. And with the Nerf guns, yeah, I mean it's been fun. Like just like now I'm so deep in it. I'm like, I'm gonna buy another Nerf gun just because like it'll be fun. But yeah, it's interesting because like TikTok's a lot more sensitive with stuff. Like I've noticed, like I've had videos that only get banned on TikTok. And then my bans usually and suspensions or whatnot, or videos just getting taken down on like Instagram, and Twitter is usually for like music copyright violations. YouTube, I don't know if I've had any big issues on YouTube, but TikTok didn't like me waterboarding myself. They
Oh, really?
they did not like me waterboarding myself. They also said I was like promoting like drugs when I was talking about the CIA. promoting drugs. I'm like, I'm not the CIA. I'm just like reporting on what they did. But I guess the algorithm, it's a little hard to tell the difference with those things. So, the conspiracy theorists in me thinks like, oh, they're trying to take me down. But, I don't really know. I've seen a lot of videos just get taken down for like literally no reason. And then like seeing the most like misogynist video you've ever seen just go super viral and not get taken down. It's still up, and it's like, okay. So there's definitely some work that needs to be done on the content moderation side, and just the R&D that goes into developing it. I mean, I know they've been trying to work on different AI technologies that sort of power those content moderation solutions, but it's just, it's obviously coupled with, actual CIA agents and whatnot trying to sort of censor things that go against the U.S. interests. It's tricky. It's nebulous. You're left to suspicion on why your video gets taken down. But so far I consider myself lucky. Most of my videos have been managed to make the rounds.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I guess whenever you make a new account on any of these social networks nowadays, social media like Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or whatever, I mean, you'll just be deluged by like horrible reactionary content from the get-go, whether it's Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro or Andrew Tate videos, or you're just constantly being suggested that you watch another PragerU video and you're like, I don't care. I don't want this stuff. And it doesn't matter. And I often think that that's probably like dumbing us down as a society, not only because we're being fed this drivel, but also because people are really dissuaded from making like longer, more high quality stuff because they know they're never going to get the views that way.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how bad the YouTube algorithm is. Like just like politically, like topically, it's just like you get like just the most like you said. I mean, the Jordan Peterson like it's become a cliche at this point. It's like Ben Shapiro owns feminists, and it's just like tailored for like 13-year-old boys, and it's just very like, and it dominates the search results. I mean, you look up like, I don't know, you could look up transgender or you look up feminist or whatever, like all the reactionary stuff bubbles to the top. All this this algorithm really favors all the fear driven, hate driven stuff, and yeah, like you said, it might incentivize people to kind of lean more into like that type of content since that's what gets views. And to your earlier comment with the YouTube comments, yeah, I remember back in the day, they're pretty awful. Some like live leak level types of community engagement. Yeah.
Oh man, you just reminded me of Live Leak. There's this somewhere that I haven't thought about for a couple of years for sure. That was where the Too Hot for YouTube clips ended up, I think.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a generation of people that just like got exposed to Live Leak and like just didn't know how to deal with it, and then it disappeared. Now everyone's like, that was real, right? That happened. I remember seeing like some crazy, great, like, I don't know why, I think our like social studies teacher in high school showed us that, and I remember seeing just like war footage that like I've never seen before, and it was just like seeing like 50 cal snipers, US troops like blowing off the heads of like Taliban. I'm like, holy shit, like I've never seen this before. YouTube obviously isn't going to allow this. I forgot what happened to Live Leak. I think they got taken down at some point. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That hasn't crossed my mind for quite a while.
Yeah, well, glad I could bring it down a trip down memory lane.
All right, this next clip I want to show you is, how would I describe it? I guess you're giving a little history of like how the world works, basically, at least since 1945. It's called The US Was Inspo. Let's watch that now. All right, this little clip we watched called The US Was Inspo, I think it's a great introduction to imperialism and how it works. What I get from it, I think you're stating here, is basically that the United States took over Europe's colonies after World War II, and that's how the world is really structured right now, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It was like when I look at the video, sometimes part of me feels a little like it's a little disjointed because I'm like trying to talk about so many things. But I think like looking back, I wanted to like, yes, talk about that. And just like, just challenge the narrative also just around like the US was like the good guys before and after World War II and obviously during, and it, that's it. And like, it was just there to defeat the Nazis and Imperial Japan. So I wanted to kind of challenge the narrative and show like, okay, there's like, the US is not a great place. And so do that. And then also like just talk about the colonization of the Philippines. I'm half Filipino, so like that topic's, obviously near to me. And I wanted to sort of, explore that history. And then I found that like a good, fun way to connect that topic with like the World War II topic. I remember learning years ago about, what's the name of the book? It's like Hitler's American Model, I think, where it talks about Nazi, well, in this case, like lawyers, but yeah, I mean, through history, like Nazi lawyers, scientists, officials looked at the U.S. as sort of this like model to both learn from, to emulate, as well as things to avoid in the interests of Nazi Germany. It's no secret that like eugenicists in Nazi Germany were fond of what the U.S. had been doing to Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans, especially in California. Looking at the sort of anti-miscegenation laws. I mean, no place was like really as advanced and like granular as the U.S. was. I mean, obviously it exists in like other places, like in Europe and South Africa, but like the U.S. had these different state level anti-miscegenation laws, basically saying like X group can't marry Y group or Z group or whatever, which translated usually just to like white people and Black people can't get married. And like Native Americans, as well as different Asian groups or even Pacific Islander groups. So yeah, getting lost in that and reading about like how the Nazis took very careful note of that when crafting the Nuremberg laws, which was just something that I feel like, a lot of Americans learned through the school curriculum. But the conveniently left out part is that this was modeled directly after what the U.S. had been doing. And of course, the Nuremberg laws, targeted Jewish people, and then it was later expanded into Romani and Black people. But those laws passed in 1935. Also, were modeled after like the in a fucked up way. Looked at the one drop rule in the U.S., where just one drop of Black blood would define you as a Black person. And even the Nazis were like, okay, that's a little too much. We're gonna do if you have one grandparent that's Jewish. It was like crazy, right? And so just like learning about all that, and specifically with anti-miscegenation laws, how they would look at people like Puerto Ricans and Filipinos who were in U.S. colonies at that time, Puerto Rico still, and it became a way to really subjugate people into like second-class citizenship, which the Nazis took keen interest in. And I thought that was really interesting, and I started to see the similarities. They were Filipinos and Puerto Ricans. They can vote in national elections, still can't in the case of Puerto Rico. And it just became amazing, like that this set of laws that prevented marriage, but also stripped them of their citizenship and the right to vote, were things that were already in place in the U.S. So I want to sort of challenge the narrative of like the U.S. just being this like wholesome freedom fighter during World War II, rather than just being, getting caught up in a war later on, and the Soviet Union obviously doing the heavy lifting there. And, talk also about the colonization of the Philippines. And in order to talk about that, I mean, I have to talk about just the wider history of colonialism and imperialism. It's just so intrinsically tied up in world affairs. That's like, to talk about the colonization of the Philippines, you have to talk about, manifest destiny, and you have to talk about settler colonialism. You have to talk about this sort of inter-imperialist conflict of the U.S., France, UK, Germany, Netherlands, all sort of trying to colonize the world. So to talk about that, you suddenly have to explain that history. So I think that's really what I wanted to try and accomplish, and just show that like this is, the history of colonization. And this led, eventually to World War II, where we started to see a new change in who the hegemon would be. That is the U.S., of course, after World War II, becoming the sort of leader in all the imperialist states, U.S. companies coming in and taking over where the British and French and et cetera have been. So yeah, trying to condense and distill all of that into a quick video was hopefully what I managed to do there.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I guess if you really want to understand, and if you're really genuine about looking at things like Puerto Rico and Philippines and Guam, and even earlier with things like Cuba and Manifest Destiny, you really have to start looking at as the US as an infant empire, and an empire that wanted to expand and grow. That's something I really like about the channel, the Empire Files, which they really take as their absolute beginning basis of it, which is you have to look at the US in the framework of an empire. And at the end of World War II, the United States literally had 50% of the world's wealth. Think about Europe and Asia were just destroyed. They only had 4% of the world's population in the US, though. And these planners in Washington were meeting and coming up with strategies called like Grand Area Doctrine, whereby they said, well, the Nazis or the Soviets, they'll have their little part of Europe and maybe Central Asia, but we're going to take the grand area. And that meant taking over Africa, taking over much of Asia, Latin America, which was to them the US's backyard already, which basically meant that they saw the United States as having this global empire. And that didn't really last very, very long because China came along, the communists in the late 40s kicked the US out. A lot of people don't know the United States invaded and occupied China with a very large army for 4 years until 1949. They were kicked out unceremoniously. And if you read the documents, all these guys in Washington are talking about the loss of China, the loss of China. We lost it. And, recriminations and finger pointing was going on all over the place. But you can only really lose something that you think that you own. And so it kind of allows people to see into their mentality that they thought they really do own the art in the world. And maybe when the Soviet Union fell apart in the 80s and 90s, the US, there was this sense that this was the end of history and the United States was going to be top dog forever. But I feel like in the last 10 years or so, US power has really slipped. I mean, do you agree with that? That US dominance in terms of military, economic, culture is kind of on the wane? And to what extent do you think that's correct?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like an empire sort of crumbling. It's the its status as the hegemon of the world is being challenged, and whether that's from like communist efforts or just competing capitalist forces, the U.S. is sometimes seems like it's waning, and hopefully regardless of what happens, it creates conditions where people can actually the working class can actually rise up. But yeah, it's also interesting, back to your point with like China and the Soviet Union. I mean, it's just funny how this stuff's always left out, right? The American and like European interests in these places, they don't talk about all the Western nations and Japan in China prior to the revolution. They don't talk about all the European interests, the French and the Germans and the British in Russia before the Bolsheviks. They don't talk about the land ownership in Cuba prior to the Cuban Revolution and the U.S. backed dictator Batista there. This stuff always gets conveniently left out. But back to your later point, I mean, this is all just to sort of maintain this image of this sort of democracy when it's really just an empire. And now it seems like it's sort of flailing. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we live in interesting times, I guess.
Yeah.
The last clip I did want to talk about, I wanted to go back to the CIA because I really liked this little video you made. It's called CIA History Across Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and so on. And it kind of sums up how the United States has been able to exert its control over the rest of the world, like we were talking about for the last few minutes. Let's just very quickly see that. Okay, so if you like that video, you can find it at James Rehwald's TikTok, his Instagram. You're across pretty much every social media platform, aren't you?
Yeah.
Nice one. All right. So, what I really like about that video is kind of like how you link the refugee crisis in places like the US southern border directly to US actions abroad. Could you tell us a bit more about that, how you see these things as being connected?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously the world's so vast, and there's different ways the U.S. has been involved abroad. But it's just like one of those things that's always conveniently left out of the conversation when we talked about, whether it's refugees or migrant workers or migrants, any form of immigrant. There's you really got to think about it as like forced migration. I mean, these people are leaving because of different reasons, namely imperialism, the unequal exchange set up between the U.S. and its other allies against or with the global South. All these things are connected, And, maybe in the past, it was a bit more stark, right? Like in the video, like just overthrowing governments and things like that. And the US still does stuff like that. That's just like what's been confirmed. But it's also just the idea of like free trade, right? In hard quotes, just the sort of unequal exchange that is exploitative, and forces people to leave their homes. And the CIA very much plays a huge role in that. And looking through history, I mean, it's just such a long list of coups and coup attempts and all sorts of interventions, invasions, and whatnot. And I mean, Latin America has been a huge victim of that. And that stuff always gets left out of the narrative conveniently when we talk about, providing asylum to people fleeing poverty and violence. And then even if you don't believe in the economic aspects, or you just aren't really in tune with the idea of imperialism, or capitalist imperialism, is like, stuff like arms. I mean, you look at we talk literally about places in Central America. Trump obviously like saying these people can't come here. I mean, Kamala Harris saying the same thing when she visited.
To folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border, do not come. Do not come.
It's a bipartisan position, but you can look at like the loose arms, the illegal arms. They're all made. The majority comes from American manufacturers. Also, like the arms deals that that the U.S. sells to police and military forces in these countries. But we just, we don't seem to care about that. It's just about the people fleeing the violence there. So yeah, the CIA has been a huge facilitator of that violence in every part of the world.
It's kind of the same in Europe, actually. There's a similar refugee crisis happening with people from Africa and West Asia who are trying to escape their desperate situation. And it's been headline news for years and years, and it's actually sprung whole big nativist right-wing parties across the continent. But in the entirety of the discourse, we're never asking where are these people coming from and why. We're never asking why is it they're coming from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, countries like that, and not countries like, for instance, Jordan or Saudi Arabia, which are nations who have not been blown to smithereens by NATO in the last few years. I mean, there seems to be some sort of link here between having your country just destroyed to the point where it doesn't have a functioning government or like a sewage system or transport or any sort of, hope of a better future, and people fleeing their lives for their lives. But that's never really talked about in our media. So to the point where we're basically discouraged from even questioning what our militaries are doing all over the world, because that just wouldn't be good for profit, I guess.
Yeah. The popular media, not known for really getting to the root of problems and just keeping a very surface level. So yeah, that's the unfortunate truth.
All right, I've got one more question for you today. It's a bit more generic on a different topic. I feel like the satire you do, seemingly as a one-man show and are able to put out, is just so much more cutting and relevant than a lot of the satire you'll see on television nowadays. What do you think about the state of political comedy or political satire today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like, I wish there was better stuff out there. Like, I'm not even trying to sound cocky. It's just like I want to see like socialist, anti-imperialist, communist, even anarchist, whatever, creators out there. Like it's just like when you look at like political satire, it's just like very, very obviously dominated by, liberals and maybe people that maybe even like, I don't know, rad libs or whatever you want to call it, where they can kind of poke fun at themselves. But you don't really hear a lot of like humor coming from the left. And then when you do, it's hard because sometimes it's like preachy or just not funny. So I would love to see like more of that stuff. I mean, I try to think of like good example, like Parasite is, I know that's like kind of a commonly cited one, and it's not really like overtly, socialist or communist, but it plays into like, the class elements in a class society. Bong Joon-ho is he doesn't shy away from that stuff, and I feel like he's a good example of that. Boots Riley is probably like the only really big like self-described communist that's like making like comedy, satire, entertainment that I can think of offhand. I'm sure there's a bunch I'm forgetting, but it's tough to find. You can look through history and find a lot of directors that are self-described Marxists and whatnot. But it's hard. I look at like the Comedy Central guys and Adult Swim, and it's like it's tough because I don't know how far you can make it when you're trying to do anti-imperialist comedy, when you're trying to work with these big networks and studios and streaming companies. But I would like to see people push the envelope. I if they can make something funny enough and get the message to sort of be addressed in a way that doesn't get in the way of the short-term profit seeking of these companies, why not? I see like all these liberal and conservative comedians and just hope that like there can be some more principled anti-imperialists entering the same space, because it gets a little tiring watching the same type of stuff.
Yeah, what I got from listening to that sort of milieu is that a lot of comedy writers are very scared to, go after one team if they're on the other team. Or sorry, they will only go after one team if they're on the other team. They're satirizing Trump or whatever because they're on Team Blue, but they won't even pitch a joke in the writer's room, laughing at Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or whoever. I remember, I think the manufacture of consent even works here. I remember when, for instance, Michael Che, who I suspect has quite radical politics, he is named after Che Guevara after all, he got in a lot of trouble for doing a joke about Israeli apartheid, and he was, chastened by all these groups. I think that must have a big effect on you, right? Like this flack.
Oh yeah. It's like, I mean, especially like, being anti-Zionist is deep on pop. Being anti-imperialist, just being a Marxist, like that's like tough to do. I mean, obviously there's like material reasons for that in the past, like with like the McCarthyist era and Red Scare and like all those Hollywood people getting blacklisted and all that stuff. So I think the message has been made clear that like that type of stuff isn't welcome in Hollywood, whether that's just from the general public or the powers that be. So yeah, it's really tough, and it's forces people like Mint Press and myself and other, whether it's podcasters or comedians or whatever. You don't really have a billionaire funding your stuff, so it becomes very tough trying to sort of challenge the status quo. You're not bankrolled like that, and it's just unpopular with the average consumer sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We certainly at Mint Press do not have any billionaire backers or huge state funders. We're operating on a shoestring. So I will put out another plug for our annual funding drive on Indiegogo. Please do support us if you are in a position to do so economically. If you're not, you can still help us by liking our streams or giving us a 5-star review. But yeah, we've been listening to James Rehwald today. James, where can people follow you if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah. You can follow me on my Patreon or pretty much any social media. So my user is JREHWALD15 on Instagram and TikTok, or just my full name, James Rehwald, one word, on Twitter or YouTube. So feel free to follow me there or follow me on Patreon, support me on Patreon, and I'll be pumping out some more videos soon.
That's great. Thank you, James Rehwald.